So now I'm going to hand things over to our presenters today, who are Betsy Burns, Quality Enhancement Specialist for CQL, as well as Elizabeth Seitz, our Director of Organizational Excellence. And they'll be covering Ready, Set, Action, how to craft an effective accreditation plan. Elizabeth, Betsy, it's all yours.
Thank you, Seth. Welcome, everyone. So excited to have everyone here to talk about crafting effective accreditation plans. So together with my colleague, Betsy.
Hi there.
And we will be your hosts for today's webinar. So let's go ahead and get started. So as we always like to do, we like to start by sharing CQL's vision and mission. Our vision is a world of dignity, opportunity, and community for all people. And our mission is that we are dedicated to the definition, the measurement, and the improvement of personal quality of life. CQL accredits over 390 organizations across 23 United States, in Canada, and in Ireland. And there are lots of values and benefits to CQL accreditation, of course. Most importantly, the accreditation process has a huge positive impact on people receiving services, and ultimately can lead to improved services. Other benefits include external validation of systems and practices, accountability for progress and continuous quality improvement, as well as resource sharing, among many, many other benefits. And now I'm going to turn it over to Betsy, and she's going to get us started by talking about a plan.
Thank you, Liz. Wait a minute. What do you mean a plan? So a plan or action plan is a document that lists the steps needed to achieve a specific goal. It breaks down the goal into actionable steps that can be easily followed and tracked. Next slide. Great. So how is CQL's plan different? Well, most providers are used to getting plans of correction or corrective action plans from an external entity. CQL plans are actually action plans. They're not put in place to correct something, but to move a system or practice forward, continuous quality improvement. So what is included in an action plan anyway? Creating an action plan requires a thorough understanding of goals and objectives, as well as the strategies to reach them. An action plan can include deadlines, resources needed to complete the tasks, and key personnel responsible for that implementation. The action plan should also clearly define who handles each task, when tasks need to be completed, and how they will be measured to determine that success. Next.
Thank you, Betsy. So we wanted to start by talking about the different types of plans that you would find here at CQL during a CQL accreditation, or as part of the accreditation. The first one is the Basic Assurances Plan. And this is typically used with quality assurances, person-centered excellence, and person-centered excellence with distinction accreditations. It is our most common type of plan requested by CQL. This is actually the plan document that an organization would receive. It is required by CQL as part of an accreditation when a basic assurances indicator is noted as not present in system and or practice by CQL. And it is typically due back to CQL 30 days post the accreditation visit. Okay, so this is what the plan typically looks like. And these are typically when you would see them and why you would see one. The next type of plan is a personal outcome measures plan, or a POM plan. This is mainly used with quality assurances accreditation, but can sometimes also be used with person-centered excellence accreditation. It is typically given to organizations going through CQL accreditation for the very first time. And first-time organizations to CQL will often see a POM plan along with that basic assurances plan that we just spoke about. A POM plan or personal outcome measures plan is required when an organization maybe isn't using the POM or isn't using it maybe as effectively as it could. So we'll talk in a little bit down the road here about what that would look like within a POM plan. And the specific goals and requirement column, which is that very first column, is typically filled out by CQL. So you know what the specific goal is that we're looking for, and then everything else is completed by the organization. And again, like the BA plan, the basic assurances, like the other plans we're going to talk about, it is due to CQL 30 days post the accreditation visit. The next type of plan is the Person-Centered Excellence Short-Term Plan. And this is used with PCE and then PCE with distinction accreditations. And these are both these accreditation terms are 4 years. So typically, this is developed, the draft is at least, by organizational stakeholders during the accreditation visit. So during a PCE or PCE with distinction accreditation, there is a stakeholder day where the stakeholders that are involved in that day develop draft short-term plans for the organization. And then the final plan is due to CQL 30 days post-accreditation visit. So during the accreditation, draft plans are developed, and then 30 days post the accreditation, the final draft of these plans would be due to CQL. The next type of plan is Person-Centered Excellence Long-Term Plan document. And this is, again, used with PCE and PCE with distinction accreditations. So this would not be part of a quality assurances accreditation. This happens during the visit to check-in with CQL. So as part of Person-Centered Excellence or Person-Centered Excellence with distinction accreditation, there are 2 check-in visits during the 4-year term. And the long-term plans are developed during what we call the visit to check-in at that 12 to 18-month mark after the initial visit. So during that check-in visit, the organization and CQL would look at the progress that was made on those short-term plans and then work together to determine what the long-term plans would be or what they want them to look like. Now, the long-term plans may be new actions, or they may be a continuation of action steps from the short-term plan. Okay. Long-term plans are meant to be the organization's priorities or dreams for the remaining 2 to 2.5 years of that 4-year accreditation term. Okay. And then development of these is done during that visit too, with a check-in on the progress of these long-term plans that is done during what we call the visit 3, or at that 36-month mark of the accreditation term. And of course, the final long-term plan, like all our other plans, is due 30 days post that visit with CQL. Now, there are a couple of other types of CQL plans that aren't as common, but they do exist and they do come up. These are probationary and provisional. Now, let's start with probationary. A probationary plan is occasionally used during a visit 1, so that full first accreditation visit. Okay, sometimes an organization might receive a probationary plan. Now, the actions are typically determined by CQL based on the priority needs as they saw during that accreditation visit. So probationary, this might happen during or when there is some systemic concerns, especially around rights, dignity, or abuse neglect that need to be addressed prior to a full accreditation being awarded. Okay. So that is when a probationary plan might be provided to an organization. And then those plans are due to CQL at a date determined by CQL, which might typically last from either 30 days to 6 months. Most commonly, it's 90 days, with a few priorities listed out for the organization to work on prior to a full accreditation award being given. This doesn't mean that accreditation won't be achieved. It's just kind of a first sub-step to that full accreditation being awarded. Then there is a provisional plan. And occasionally during those check-in visits, so an organization is accredited and they are they're doing their visit 2 or their visit 3. Now, after that visit or during that visit, a CQL staff might see that there's maybe some lack of progress made on any of the original plans from the first visit. That is when it might be determined that a provisional plan will be given, indicating some priority steps that CQL wants the organization to work on in order to be able to maintain that full accreditation. So again, the provisional plan is occasionally used during those check-in visits, the visit 2 or visit 3. The actions are determined by CQL based on lack of progress. And Betsy and I will talk all throughout this webinar about the important thing of any plan is just continued progress. And of course, these plan, if one is given, is usually due to CQL at a date determined by CQL in the organization, typically anywhere from 30 to 90 days. And this might also be used just to ensure there's still a commitment to the partnership with CQL. Now, Betsy's going to talk to us about how we start small but think big.
I love this slide. So when writing a plan, we strongly encourage organizations to start small but think big. Much success really does come from starting small after thinking big. Rather than jumping on the bandwagon for one potentially big project, the idea is broken down into smaller pieces. So think big means that your idea should be big. This is the goal, something you would like to achieve in the future. Start small means that maybe we shouldn't do everything we think we need at this moment, just the small action that brings us closer to the goal. And why is it good to think big? It's about staying focused on long-term goals. It's about being ambitious and not being afraid to dream big. By thinking big, you create a mindset that is focused on growth, innovation, and progress. So start small and think big, and it really applies to all plan types. All big things come from small beginnings. The seed of every habit is a single tiny decision, but as that decision is repeated, a habit sprouts and grows stronger, roots entrench themselves, and then your branches grow. So some of you have heard of PACT. If you haven't, PACT is a goal-setting technique that compared to other methods focuses on outcomes. PACT goals also focuses on output. By focusing on output, some people have found that PACT goals allow them to track progress toward achieving a goal and creating new habits. The PACT technique works especially well for long-term ambitious goals because they're focused on that continuous growth. In fact, I like to say that CQL is like a PACT. We forward a partnership agreement with organizations toward continuous quality improvement. Next slide, Liz. PACT. Purposeful, the reason for which something is done or created for which something exists, or why would you do it? So the purposeful part of PACT effort represents your goal's foundation, its meaning and the passion that drives you toward achieving it. A purposeful intent does not merely satisfy a fast or frivolous gratification, but rather it speaks more to the values that fuel your ambitions and your actions. PACT is actionable. It's about taking action today to avoid overplanning for the future. This means making efforts to change the things within your reach that you can presently control instead of focusing on distant outcomes. Think of actionable as being similar to living in the now. So, of course, preparing for the future is essential, but there can be downfalls to overplanning. Many of us way overanalyze the situation, which can lead to inaction. And this analysis paralysis really does keep us from how many of us move toward learning and trying something new and attempting several iterations after each attempt. So, really keeping it actionable helps you focus on continuous growth and continuous learning. In fact, the next part of PACT is continuous and flexible. With the continuous pursuit of repeatable and straightforward routines, you can avoid choice paralysis, which I know that's happened to me on numerous occasions, probably far too many. But when too many options keep you from immediately doing something actionable, otherwise known as analysis paralysis, or FOBO, fear of a better option, it's a consequence of overplanning and overanalyzing a situation. Spending too much time on research as opposed to action can also be stifling. It's easy to overthink, considering all the things you don't know yet, or maybe all the possible negative outcomes. So maybe a good mantra to think about is, once I know better, I do better. In other words, through continuous action and experimentation, I learn how I can do better next time. PACT is trackable. Behaviors are like bicycles. They look different, but the core mechanisms are the same: wheels, brakes, and pedals. And that's from a book called Tiny Habits by B.J. Fogg. So PACT is trackable. Lastly, it's really quite different than measurable from SMART goals. This approach with trackable can positively impact mental health and wellness as it pertains to a sense of accomplishment based on effort and progress. For example, I personally ride a bike in good weather and a stationary bike in the not so good weather. So when riding my stationary bike, instead of riding 45 minutes on the stationary bike right away, I have allowed myself time to build up to that. So with this particular example, just getting on the bike routinely, I've worked toward my 45-minute goal. It's quite commendable in itself, or at least I think so. Using the PACT model, I tracked the days I got on the bike and rode for any amount of time. The technique, like I said, is part of the Tiny Habits by B.J. Fogg. Changing one tiny thing, just as simple as getting on a stationary bike for 1 minute, helps you create a brand new habit that will lead to you accomplishing your 45-minute goal. So let's get started with some tips and tricks.
Thanks, Betsy. So we want everyone to think about those 4 areas of PACT as we move through the rest of the webinar. So again, thinking purposeful, actionable, continuous, and trackable, and we'll continue to bring those up. So just some tips and tricks. Let's just start with the basic assurances plan, because again, that is our most common type of plan that an organization would receive as part of accreditation. Okay. And no matter the type of accreditation that you're going through, there's often a BA plan that is a part of that. So the first bullet point here really talks about using your validated basic assurances self-assessment to understand what opportunities CQL has identified in each indicator. So on the BA plan, what gets listed are, again, the indicators that are found to be not present or opportunities in system and or practice. So if you don't know where to start, I'm sure you'll have plenty of notes from your time with CQL during the visit, but you can go back to your validated basic assurance self-assessment. You can go to that indicator area on that self-assessment and align it with ones that are on the plan. So if indicator 1A of the basic assurances is on your plan, okay, as needing movement, then go to indicator 1A in your basic assurances self-assessment and read the comments and recommendations from CQL and start there. In that section of the basic assurances self-assessment, it should talk about the good things that are going on, and it should also talk about any comments or recommendations of what needs to be done to move forward. Okay. So you can also use your accreditation report, because every accreditation report will have a factor summary section as well. So Each factor area will have a summary of strengths and opportunities or recommendations that you can go back and look at to see, okay, where was it that CQL said we should start, or what the goal is, okay? So that is always our first suggestion, is that you start there, okay? Because there may be a lot of indicators on that plan. So always take your plan, start with that, go back to the documentation you received from CQL and see what is written as far as your strengths and as far as the opportunities for continued movement forward. Second bullet point really is very important as well. Begin only with 1 or 2 action steps for each indicator. Now, we're talking about movement forward, not, like Betsy said, it's not corrective action. You're not fixing a problem. Okay, we're looking for steps to just keep moving forward in that specific area. So, like Betsy said, think big, start small. Just start by entering 1 or 2 steps that can be manageable, okay? Because you're really looking at your next 12 to 18 months. So what is the first thing that we need to do to get started in this area, okay? Always identify reasonable timeframes. When you look at those first couple action steps, think realistically, how long is this going to take us? Okay, to do a good job, to do what needs to be done, how much time do we need? Okay, so if you find you put an action step that may take 3 years, maybe you need to break that action step down a little bit. Okay, what are ways that we can break this down to be more manageable, to be more meaningful, to be more specific, that we can focus on realistically and do a good job with over the next 12 to 18 months? There's a column about persons responsible. Okay. With persons responsible, you know, it shouldn't always be the same person. Now, we understand in very small organizations, that's not always possible. It usually comes back to one person. But as much as you can, try to divvy up the responsibility for completion of that action step. Okay? It might be a single person or position, but it might also be an established committee that you have. So maybe it becomes a committee's responsibility to complete that action step. Okay? Evidence of success is the last column. So how do you know? Okay, again, go back to PACT. Okay, the evidence of success, we're looking for concrete data or evidence that shows how you met that action step. So for every action step that you know, you're also going to want to say to yourselves, how do we know when we've met this? How do we know when we're there? So some evidence of success may be something, number one, as simple as a policy. If in that indicator area, one of the actions is to update or create a policy, right, as requested by CQL, then the evidence of success would be policy created or policy revised, okay? It can be as simple as that. Other evidence of success could be things like assessments that have been developed or implemented, or discovery tools. It could be a training curriculum that was put into place or that was updated based on, you know, some recommendations. It could be a pre-test or a post-test. We've seen some organizations use this as their evidence where they've done a pre-test like on people's understanding of rights. And then a year later, they've done a post-test, same questions, same people on their understanding of rights to see if they see any difference in the efforts that their actions have made. You might use actual data too, such as POM data or personal outcome measures data. One example of that is if there was an indicator around meaningful work and activity choices listed as an indicator on the plan, you might use POM data around people choose work to see if you see an increase or if you see a change in the supports data. And then, of course, it could also be something like committee meeting minutes. Okay? We often see this around the area of incident management systems. Maybe all the components of that incident management system weren't present, so the practice was noted as not present. And so what the organization does as an action step is they enhance their committee minutes to really reflect the trends that they're seeing, the data they're looking at, and what they're doing in response. So it could be that the evidence is just committee minutes. We also want you to remember, as an organization, when you're putting together your basic assurances plan, is to prioritize. This is especially important if there are a lot of indicators identified on the plan. Okay, so we don't want organizations to get overwhelmed. So if there's a lot of indicators on that plan, first, maybe you want to categorize them into different categories. Okay, maybe you'd say you have 20 indicators on the plan. Maybe you want to take them and you want to categorize them into top, medium, and low priority. Maybe you categorize them into areas that were noted as only needing work in system. Maybe you do it by practice only, and then maybe you have another category of system and practice. You could also categorize based on action step or time frame. What you feel after going through the plan, the length of time it's going to take to complete an action step or a goal. Okay, so really start by prioritizing so you don't get overwhelmed. Now, sometimes CQL will prioritize for an organization based on what they learned, but oftentimes we like to do it together with the organization. Okay, so ask CQL staff, work with your staff to help you prioritize. Because we certainly do not expect that action steps for 20 different indicators is realistically going to be completed in 12 months. Okay? So there may be indicators around due process, decision-making supports, meaningful work and activity choices, factor 10 around basic assurances systems that take a while to really get robustly in place. So we understand that sometimes some indicators simply take more time and effort. And so we want you to work together with us to help prioritize so that you do not feel overwhelmed. And of course, actions can also take longer depending on if it's a system or a practice noted as present. Sometimes, a system is just, what's missing is maybe just some things in a policy. Okay, that takes a lot less time to put together than implementing a change in practice across an organization. So you may want to focus on some low-hanging indicators, and what we mean by that is, again, something that just needs an adjustment to the policy or enhancement to the process. Or you can focus on areas that have farther-reaching effects once implemented. So far-reaching indicators might include like indicator 1B around supporting people to exercise their rights and responsibilities. Maybe you just take the time and effort to implement a robust rights discovery system or an assessment, and then that helps you understand the education that you need to put in place. That's going to take time, but the effects that it has on people are far-reaching throughout the basic assurances. And, another one is indicator 8A around plan development. The more you work to get in there to develop systems to help people kind of take control of their plans and have say into their plans, that can have far-reaching effects as well. Okay. Some tips for the PALM plan. There's a specific goal column that we talked about, completed by CQL. That's the first column. We provide this, and then the organization completes the action steps column. And the action steps are what the organization is going to put in place to work towards that goal. Okay. And often CQL staff will actually put the specific goals in order of which, should be done first before you can realistically work towards those that are underneath that. So the action steps is completed by the organization. The steps the organization will take to accomplish the specific goal as outlined by CQL. Again, identify reasonable timeframes. Focus on what you can accomplish in the next 12 to 18 months. But again, start small, think big. So you're going to start small in the next 12 to 18 months, but you're going to still think big in those next 3 to 4 years of your accreditation to say, where do we ultimately want to be? People, again, who's going to be completing that action step? Who's going to be in charge of that? And then again, like the other type of plan, the evidence of success. How do you know when you're there? What's that concrete data or evidence to show that you've achieved what you were setting out to achieve? And for personal outcome measures, it may be things like certificates of attendance. Okay. It may be POM data that you've started to collect. It may be a written POM procedure that you developed to show how personal outcome measures will be used within your organization. Now, PCE, short-term and long-term plans, these are both the same type of document. It's just the length of time that looks different. So it starts with, what's our dream? And that's where you're thinking big again, okay? The dream is the big thing that ultimately you want to accomplish in that area, okay? So again, think big because you're dreaming there. Where it's from, okay? So these are 3 areas, the what's our dream, where it's from, and why it's important, that are at the top of these plan documents. So the where it's from, that is the factor area that corresponds to your dream. And there are specific factors in that stakeholder day that are focused on in these plans. Okay, so it would come from one of those factor areas that are chosen as a priority by the stakeholders during the accreditation. And it may also align with an area on the basic assurances plan. So as you're working on short-term plans, you may realize that an area that was chosen by the stakeholders aligns with an area in the basic assurances plan that is an opportunity. So don't recreate the wheel, don't do double the work, just align them so they're the same. And of course, why it's important, well, that's the why stakeholders felt that this dream, this area was a priority, okay? So you'll write out, why is this our dream? Why is it important to the work that we do? Now, underneath those 3 areas on the short-term and long-term plans are the same types of things you'll see on other plans. Number 1, the action column. Okay, so what are the actions that the organization is going to complete to work towards that dream? Okay. Who are the people that are going to carry out that action? Who are the people that are going to be in charge of making sure that action stays alive? What evidence are you going to collect to show that you've achieved your action or that you're working towards that goal? And of course, we talked about deadlines, right? So keep those deadlines realistic. Okay, for each of those action steps. And then, of course, how are you going to measure success? Okay, how will you know when you've reached that action step? What's that data or that evidence, which may be linked to the evidence that you're going to collect to show how you've achieved that action step? So now Betsy is going to talk to us a little bit about True North.
Yep. So how do you know when you're headed in that right direction, keeping up that momentum and finding your true north or staying there? So for any organization, we know that clarity of purpose is a critical ingredient to success. In other words, you must know where you're headed and why you're headed there. So a compass really does provide the ideal metaphor. Just as a compass points toward a magnetic field, your personal true north directs your path and pulls you forward. President and CEO of Trinity Services quotes, "The CQL accreditation process is like the gradual calibration of a compass. Our Trinity compass has generally remained focused on true north." So how do we know we're headed in the right direction? Well, we're going to look at the evidence of success and why the evidence of success column is so important in those charts that Elizabeth showed you. So creating awareness about what success is and when we achieve it is really the key to effective and powerful change. However, we know it's a continuous journey and it really is progress over perfection. Anthony Robbins says, success leaves clues. So we look at the difference between system and practice. Now, Liz talked a little bit about those things. We know that a system that's a foundational piece that organization supports that provide the structure for the organizational practice. Those things can be policies and procedures, can be staff training, any other types of systems that ensure the sustainability. Practice is what we observe in daily operations that demonstrates how an organization's supports are put into action. For example, they need to be tangible. So let me think about this. So an example of a system of practice for factor 1B, which is a system to create a rights assessment. That would be a system. So if someone's asking you from CQL to look at factor 1B to create a system for a rights assessment, the evidence of the system is the rights assessment, and the evidence of the practice is how many people will have participated in a rights assessment within 1 year of the assessment beginning, developing, and being implemented. So that's actual evidence of success, a system in practice. And outcomes can be achieved and tangible, but also can be stories. And we always ask for stories. There are really two general types of data. There's more, but generally two, quantitative and qualitative, and both are equally important. You use both types to demonstrate effectiveness, importance, and value in what you're looking at. So quantitative data refers to any information that can be quantified, counted, or measured. POM data is both quantitative and qualitative, and it's tangible with outcomes achieved. So when in doubt, people always say, what do we do if we need help, right? When in doubt, you're going to find out. How do we know we're heading in the right direction? You can reach out with questions. You can talk to anyone at CQL, but start with your lead reviewer. It might be more comfortable. I always say, we're kind of like gum on the bottom of your shoe in a good way. We don't like to leave you. We want to be there to support you and help you in any way. Our website has all our contact information. We have a great Facebook e-community as well. So don't hesitate to reach out. But keeping up the momentum, what do we do if we aren't making progress? What if our action steps aren't working like we hoped? Well, how do you know you're headed in the right direction? So when you think of true north, when you think of it, it makes me think of an organization's mission, vision, and values and why it matters. It guides the direction of the organization. A mission statements may clarify the purpose and determine direction, motivate employees. They also provide a template for decision-making. They help focus energy and intention and should send a powerful message to the general public. Your vision is really a declaration of your organization's objectives. The statement can serve as a guide for your organization that indicates a defined direction for growth and goals. As your company grows, your organization grows, the vision statement might change slightly to adapt to the differing needs. And of course, value statements highlights an organization's core principles and philosophical ideals. It can both use to be informed and guide decisions and behaviors of people inside the organization and any external stakeholders. And that's why it's important to the company for people to see that and helps you understand what the vision and mission means. All right, keeping up the momentum. Albert Einstein says we cannot solve problems using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So once again, how do you know if we're making progress or action steps aren't working like we hoped? It's okay to switch gears. Changing gears really is a choice. Changing gears can be more than just pushing harder. It can be really a strategic shift. And that strategic gear shift can do more than simply push the pedal down harder or drive harder. You can find a way to create a strategic shift that really truly invigorates your employees and people who will automatically push a little harder under the natural excitement of growth and innovation and positive change. Einstein knew it, and sometimes there just is a better way, but you won't arrive at top gear results with first gear thinking. So keep the evidence and updates also for us because we like to see for your records, and also CQI likes to see how you've modified your action steps as you move forward. So keeping the momentum going and staying alive, this should be part of your overall plan to have a quality management system. And that's also factor 10 in the basic assurance monitoring system. An integrated management system integrates all your organization's systems and processes into one complete framework, enabling the organization to work as a single unit with all the employees. The next step to create accountability is to assign roles and responsibilities for each objective and action in your plan. And Liz mentioned this earlier. By assigning roles and responsibilities, you can create a sense of ownerships, and that's key, and accountability among your team, and ensure that everyone knows what's expected from them. Also, meeting regularly to review progress, track and communicate progress. Remember, this is also part of the pact. You set up a system to monitor the execution of your plan, collect data and feedback, and identify any issues or gaps. And I don't know if it's the most important thing, but it's certainly a very important thing, is to celebrate the wins. By recognizing and rewarding performance, you can boost morale, motivation, foster loyalty and retention, and truly reinforce a culture of accountability. John Kotter says that wins are molecules of results. They must be recognized, collected, and communicated early and often. To track progress and energize volunteers to persist, this is just one part of his 8-stage change plan. The whole process includes urgency, recruiting influential change leaders, build a vision, effectively communicate it, remove obstacles, and create those quick wins. Build on your momentum and do these things. You can help make the change part of your whole organizational culture.
Fabulous. Thanks, Betsy. I just, because we're just slightly ahead of time, I just want to reiterate some of these things that are just so important that we've talked about. You know, with any plan, you really have to have accountability to the plan. That's how you keep the momentum going. Part of that might be creating just kind of a culture of understanding why it's important. And like Betsy said, that goes back to your mission, vision, and values. If your mission, vision, and values are your true north, or at least it should be, and so that should always be what brings you back to the momentum and helping to really create the culture of why this is important and the accountability. And, you know, you have to meet regularly, like Betsy said, otherwise it will get lost. So that regularly could be weekly, it could be monthly, it could be quarterly. It's whatever works for the organization, based on, you know, how big you are, your different departments, or, you know, things that are going on in the day-to-day of the organization. And as Betsy said too, it's okay to shift gears. You know, just like her slide with the bike showed, on your bike, you have to shift gears. You cannot use the same gear at every part of the road that you're on. When you're going uphill, you shift the gears, you know, to a lower gear. To, you know, when you're just kind of going along the road, you're in a higher gear. So, it's okay to shift gears. It's okay to change up how you're doing things, because as you know better, as you learn, you know better, you do better, and you have to then shift based on what you've learned. That is continuous quality improvement. So that was just to really kind of sum up, you know, everything that we talked about. And lastly, of course, celebrate those wins. You know, organizations do not do enough celebrating when they do hit those goals, hit those action steps, when they've achieved something. Really, really celebrate those, and document that. And again, if you shift gears, it's good to shift gears. It's okay. Document why you made the decision that you made at the time, so that 3 years down the road, you try to rack your brain and remember, why is it that we moved away from that action step? There probably was a very good reason why. So, Betsy, you had some great resources that I think, did you want to share those with people?
Sure, and also Seth is going to put them in the chat box. One of the things, you know, anyone that knows me well at all knows I love John Kotter, and specifically the 8 steps for leading change. I've used them numerous times. They're highly effective. And it keeps you on track. It keeps the momentum going. You have the right people at the table. And he really does push to celebrate the wins. Having people be accountable, having people responsible really does change organizational culture. Also, tiny habits, the small changes that change everything. That's where you think big and start small, or start small and think big. By BJ Fogg. And also discover your true north, really looking at how you are guiding an organization, either from a leadership perspective and how you're pulling everyone along, or how you're doing that as a group. It's by a gentleman named Bill George. So Discover Your True North is a really nice book, particularly when you're looking at strategic planning and doing any kind of quality improvement plan at all.
Perfect. Thank you, Betsy. So of course, we always encourage people to sign up for CQL emails. Lots of great resources that are sent straight to you. And Seth, I imagine, already has that that address posted in the chat box. We also, tell people, follow us on social media. We've got a lot of great things on our social media accounts between Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Our YouTube channel is absolutely fantastic. And of course, our Facebook e-community is wonderful as well. It's all about, the Facebook e-community is our partners that love to share resources, just ask questions, learn from each other. So there's a lot of great things on our e-community, and great connections that can be made between CQL partners.